Morning, everybody. I'd just like to say a couple of words. I'd like to welcome you to Brighton, Develop Brighton 2018. We've got some great weather planned for the next 3 days. We've got some great lineup as well. Let's just hope that we get a great result on Wednesday evening too. So I'd like to introduce a couple of people. The first is Nathan Brown, who's editor of Edge magazine. And the second is a true industry legend. I'm delighted that he's going to be recognised as such tomorrow night at the awards. Shuhei Yoshida. So over to Nathan. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Is this thing on? Yes. Excellent. Is shoes on?
Yes.
Excellent.
Look at those people. It's a full house.
It is a full house, isn't it? That's slightly terrifying. Thank you for pointing that out. So, Shu, thank you very much for coming all this way and spending time with us today. Yours has been a long and remarkable career in a lot of ways. You've been there since the start of the PlayStation era.
Yep.
And you're still there today. That means that we've got 25 years of console history to get through in just under an hour.
Yep. So I've tried it a couple of times, and we typically end up still within the PS1 era. So yeah, let's try again.
Should we start with PS2?
Might be a way.
Let's start at the beginning, and we'll try and rattle through. I've got a timer here. So, talk to us about those very early days when you were part of almost like a skunkworks team within Sony, helmed by the characterful Ken Kutaragi.
Yeah, so when I joined Ken's team, he only had the group of engineers, working on the original PlayStation. It was after there's a split, with Nintendo. They were originally working on CD-ROM system for Super Nintendo, and that was, canceled. And they moved on to create their own game system. At that time, it was called like a PSX, like a code name. And so I had this luck that the first time I joined Sony, in 1986, right from the university. And the first place I was assigned to was in the corporate staff function. And that was like a group of young people helping, like a communicator between the headquarters and these small new businesses, being incubated. And I was not assigned to Ken's team, but one of my colleagues were working on helping Ken's team, who were working on the audio chip for Super NES and CD-ROM systems. And that guy was not really knowledgeable about video game, and I was a huge video game fan, so I was giving him advice that if you were talking about 3D, we should work with Namco or something like that. And the boss at that time in the corporate was person named Tokunaka-san. And once time he called me when I was working for a PC business of Sony. We designed and manufactured the very first Macintosh notebook. It was called PowerBook 100. The smallest one was designed and manufactured by Sony, in our team. That team went on to make Bio, actually. But I was there to be a communicator with, Apple. At that time, my little project, an R&D project with Apple, to make the pen computing system based on that, PowerBook was canceled, and I was looking for work. Then Tokunaka-san, my boss, the first boss, called me and asked me to meet this guy called Kutaragi, and I was like, oh yes. And what Ken told me was, because I was in the PC industry, and Ken talked to me that Shuhei. Silicon Graphics workstation. At that time, it was used for making pre-rendered CDs for movies, and one system was priced up to $100,000. pretty expensive. And Ken said, you know Silicon Graphics Workstation, I'm making a game system of that performance, and I sell it under $500. And I was like, oh, that's great, Kutaragi-san, you're a genius. And I thought he was just lying, right? Yeah, so I went back to Tokunaka-san and said that, well, what Ken is saying, I don't believe, that's possible. And but Tokunaka-san said to me that, well, I believe what Ken is saying. And I was like, really? That's great. Can I join? Yeah. So that's how I got the job as the first non-engineers, of Ken's team. At the time, there are 20 plus people, all engineers working on the system. And it was very interesting. 2 weeks after I joined Ken's team, Tokunaka-san came over to become the head of Ken's group. Yeah, so the Sony was trying to move the project into the more business phase. And so I learned that Tokunaka-san and those people were, putting those people that they knew might be helpful to start this business. So I was so lucky to join the team from the very beginning. And my first job, actually, the first assignment was to create some, put together some presentation to try to convince Sony to invest in this video game business. At that time, most of the management at Sony didn't believe in Sony brand to be attached to this toy business that was they considered the video game. But in my mind, video game is like a computer, and computer is gonna just get better and better. So that's how I got into this.
What was, you said the first time you spoke to Kutaragi, you thought he was lying. How did your opinion of him develop as you began to work with him?
Well, he's always at least 5 years ahead of time. And we wished he's a little bit, closer to reality. So the people who are working for Ken had developed this, habit of try to understand what he's saying and rewind it a few years and base that as our a direction for the business. Because working for him for many years, lots of things he had said just came about maybe 10 years after. So that was, it was really hard to work for him because he can change his mind any time. Like in the morning, he said one thing, and in the evening, he's like, why are you doing this? Who said that? And then we're like, you said that. And that's his strength. He can totally forget what he was telling the next moment. He can switch. And that was his strength, I think.
Before too long, you were acting as a producer on games like Ape Escape and Gran Turismo. These were kind of really foundational games in the early kind of 3D era. Can you just talk through some of your experiences from that time?
Yeah, so I joined Ken's team February of 1993, and Sony Computer Entertainment was formed as a subsidiary of Sony and Sony Music Japan in November of that year. And so when we started as SCE, half the company came from Sony, and I was one of them, and half the company came from Sony Music Japan. And mostly we who came from Sony side worked on hardware, and the other side, Sony Music people worked on software, like making games and sales, marketing. Because we used the distribution channel of Sony Music Japan because we chose the CD-ROM as the medium. So I was a huge game fan, and my first assignment was in the developer and publisher relations group. So it was ideal place for me to start to help the company like Konami or Namco or Bandai to bring their games to PlayStation. And our goal, I was one of the managers of the team, and we had this mantra that every game will come to PlayStation. And we made it like a marketing pitch. And so our goal, we had this, list of names of the big, good publishers and developers in Japan. And many of them didn't jump on, to PlayStation. Many video game creators of that time were very skeptical about use of 3D graphics. And they are saying something like, well, 3D is great for shooters and maybe racing games, but not anything else. But that, they are proven wrong. And so when we finally got Squaresoft to commit to do Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation, and that led to Enix to do Dragon Quest VII to PlayStation. They are like kingmakers. They had the final say, at least for the Japanese market, that whoever they support, they make the platform successful. So when that was achieved after 2 or 3 years working in third-party relations, I kind of lost the goal, right? Because the goal was to get every game to, and after getting Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, I felt like I had no more things to do. And that time, the luck had it so that the SCEA picked up this game called Crash Bandicoot, from Universal. Universal was making, Maxani and Naughty Dog was making it, but the SCEA saw the potential and agreed with Universal to publish it, from Sony. So that was a global deal. So SCE in Japan needed to publish it in Japan as well. But luck had it that no one in production teams had a good English capability. And the head of the PD group asked me if I'm interested to be the producer. So that's how I got into this game development as a producer, even though I had no experience making games. I was just helping those companies and kind of trying to learn how things were. But so I was assigned to be the localization producer for Crash Bandicoot for the Japanese market. At the same time, the company asked me to grow the internal team. At that time, we had only one team making racing game called Motor Twin Grand Prix. That was Kazunori Yamauchi's team. And they are finishing up the second game of Motor Twin Grand Prix, and they are working on the third game. And that turned out to be Gran Turismo. So when I was assigned, given the chance to become a game producer, the first 2 projects were Crash Bandicoot and Gran Turismo. I didn't even ask for it, right? I didn't even need to. I thought I was the luckiest persons in the industry. So, and these people were still very young, like Naughty Dog, in their late 20s, Kazunori, same, and Maxani was like early 30s, so was I. And they had like a big ideas, right? And those, great people push everyone who is assigned to work on their project. That really helped me to learn and become a producer. And that's when I started hiring lots of people and set up teams to create Ape Escape and Eco, with Ueda-san. I wasn't able to finish Eco because Eco team got into these technical issues that.
You don't say.
Yeah, well, frame rate, So I moved the project from PS1 to PS2. That sounds familiar, right? Yeah. So I moved to the United States because the head of the game development at that time in the States was leaving. And Kaz Hirai was the head of SCEA, offered me a job to move to the US to manage the US development. That was early 2000, when we are just launching the PS2. Yeah.
Brings us perfectly on to PS2
Yeah.
in the interest of
Yes.
time. It's such an interesting console. I said this to you last night when we had a drink, that it was obviously brilliantly successful. It's probably my favorite PlayStation, and yet, I don't know what the story is there, really. It was like you just did it again, and it was really successful. Like, what was the secret behind it, do you think?
PS2, right? Yeah, so the PS1 to PS2, actually, I remember, so my teams were still finishing AP Escape. We launched in June '99, and Legend of Dragoon in December '99. And that was a big project, actually. We had like over 100 people working on that. And we knew the system is coming out in March 2000, PS2 in Japan. It was those times that the systems were not launched globally. It was launched in one region at the time. But because it was the first transition from PS1 to PS2, we had no idea how industry manages these transitions. So we were totally unprepared from software standpoint. So as soon as we finished AP Escape, I broke the team up into smaller teams and tried to get something done for the launch. And one of the teams created this game called Fantavision. And that was, very nice little puzzle game. But when we launched it, there are lots of criticism that the system only had, Fantavision. And I was like, it's not my fault. I at least had one game, right? There's all the other producers who didn't have, games ready. But so it was brilliant success from the start. PS2 sold like crazy. But when it launched in Japan, the best-selling software was actually the Matrix DVD. Yeah, because DVD was catching on, but was still very, expensive system. And PS2 came out with the, same high-quality DVD playback capability with much, much lower, like almost disruptive pricing. And the movie Matrix was a huge hit the year before, and it was perfect timing. So the biggest launch title for PS2 in Japan was Matrix, the DVD. Yeah, so it turned out the time it took from Japanese launch and the Western launch was late that year, like October or so. Was a good thing to have because all the other publishers, caught up, and we had luck to have, very strong title support from third parties. And it took a few years, maybe another year or two. Still, PS2 days, I remember Japanese developers were able to produce their titles. And so, when people remember PS2 days, still, there are not many other ways to play video games. And everybody was playing games on console. And there are still strong titles coming from Japan. And the Western developers are really learning quickly, very quickly. I was so surprised because I moved to the US in year 2000. And when I was moving, I still had some kind of pride of being, coming from Japan in terms of making games. But after a couple of years, I stopped watching what's happening in the Japanese video game development because the Western teams are doing an amazing job. That's when I was working with people like Dave Jaffe's, making the first God of War game, and we are still working with Naughty Dog, working on Jak and Daxter, and Ratchet and Clank with Insomniac. So those teams are doing amazing job.
What sort of advantages did the US studios have over Japan at that time?
Well, the one thing is the industry was pretty open in terms of sharing ideas and information. Like the GDC was a thing already, and people are meeting and comparing notes. And that never happened in Japan. Company tried to hide those talented people because they are afraid of people being stolen. But the environment in the US is so different. They are very open, and and learning from each other. And at the same time, they are very quick to learn why some of the games made in Japan are so good in terms of like responsiveness. And so I always thought the action games in the Japanese developers were the best to make, but I was amazed how the Western teams caught on. A game like God of War was made. And another thing was it's about, I don't know about Europe, but the US, this culture of entrepreneurship. So people in Japan, the game developers tend to say that, yeah, I'll be happy making games, whatever I like. And it was sometimes very difficult that I had to convince the successful game creator to make a sequel. Because these people got bored and I want to make something new or something. But in the US, the great developers are also good at in business sense and thinking about how the economics worked in the video game business and planning for their success business-wise. So it was very easy for me I didn't have to ask when a team made a great game. I didn't have to ask for a sequel. They are already planning for the next one. And so I think that really made the teams to approach the video game development more professionally, I think, and brought in some kind of discipline, I think, and also kept the very high ambition.
PS2 was a huge success, 160 million odd units. It's still the best-selling console of all time. PS3 was not quite so successful.
That E3, like 2006, 2005. No, 2005 E3 was good. Like it was all smoke and mirror, right? But 2006 E3, that cars like announcing $599 or something like that. That was horrifying moment. We were working on, of course, PS3 titles, a launch title like Resistance, Fall of Man, or some other games. And when I went to E3, I was amazed so few third-party games, like playable. I was like, what's going on? Because the 360 was launched the year before, right? And the third parties are ahead of the curve in terms of making games for the next-gen system. So I was anticipating lots of third parties games would be there, but was not the case. Because PS3 was so architecturally different and difficult to get even some graphics onto the screen. And that, when I saw that, so going back a few years, because of our failed transition from PS1 to PS2, we are determined to prepare for transition to PS3. And it was very good, because we are able to focus on just PS3. So we are able to spend enough time to learn this very particular architecture. And so I set up a group of the best graphics engineers from all the US teams, and had Mark Cerny to help to develop this common engine, graphics engine that we used to call Edge, like Edge magazine. And so we called it as an ICE team, ICE, I-C-E. It was short for Initiative for Common Engine. So we have this engine, graphics engine, for all of our first-party teams can use to produce PS3 games for us. And that was a huge cultural change from PS2 days, that every team developed their own engine. And if you are a very talented programmer, you want to create your own engine. So I met a very huge resistance to shift from every team with every engine to this common engine initiative. But somehow I got that done and shared with all the teams, and that's how we started on PS3. And when I saw the E3 2006 that third-party publishers and developers are struggling to get their games onto PS3, company for the first time in our history asked us, or our studios team, to share what we had as with the engines we developed for our own games with all the third-party developers and publishers. So that was the time change, and the Ken moved on, and Kaz took over, and Kaz asked me, so Phil Harrison was moving on, so I succeeded Phil as the head of our studio, and that's when Kaz asked me to move to Japan to get our studio teams to work closely, participate in the actual platform development. And so it was like 2008 or so. The two projects were started same time, the PS Vita project and the PS4 project. And Mark was retained as the architect for both systems. And that's how our studio teams got involved from the very beginning. The company learned that we have really great teams to be able to contribute to not just making games, but also make the lower end systems. So the experience of Edge engine that we created and gave to the platform. So that's how the way we worked, how our studio became integral part of the platform development started. So I don't know what we are talking about, but I'm trying to explain how Ken's era and Kaz's era was a huge change. And the PS3, the difficulty of PS3.
Yes, that was it.
We are talking about, that prompted that change. Yeah, that was really necessary.
You said something last night about the way Kutaragi designed the cell, or the reason behind the way he designed the cell to be so difficult to program for. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah. So Ken was such a brilliant, engineer, and he was very charismatic. And the team who worked for Ken, the group of engineers in Japan, was so motivated. They are like, we are making the world's best, something, right? Yeah, so he was a great motivator. And maybe he was using video game as a stepping stone to realize his vision or dreams. Maybe he wanted to become next Intel or something. He always approached developing game systems up until PS3 that they worked on the system just by themselves, meaning hardware team. And we were not given access until it was done. And Ken, in a sense, he had trust in the video game developer that whatever he made, the top video game developers will be able to work on his system and understand and get the best out of that. So he didn't see the need to involve game developers into the process of designing the system. And that's how PS3 was made. And you know how successful it was.
Yes, I do. We see this a lot, though, in the console business, that there are sort of peaks and troughs, that a great success is often followed by, not a failure, but a less successful thing. When you look at, as we just discussed, PS2 to PS3, Xbox 360 to Xbox One, Wii to Wii U. Why do you think that is?
And my answer last night was, I think it's a human nature. Yeah, there must be something like the god of market or something, just enchant those, company who are on top that, you'll miss next time, you'll miss next time. Yeah. Otherwise, they are so, always the top companies have very brilliant people, working on and have done brilliant things for these systems that somehow, people make mistakes. I don't know why. And I think because it's kind of, we are all human, right? We are not perfect. And so it's very important because PS4 is doing so well that we don't forget why we are here now. What we learned from PS3 experience and the focus we had on we were really from the beginning of PS4 project focused on how to make the system very easy to work on by game developers, and at the same time easy to use by game players. And so focus on these developers and game players, that we shouldn't lose focus going forward.
As we talk about the transition from PS3 to PS4, there's no better way of doing that than The Last Guardian, which I could quite happily have spent 45 minutes just talking to you about. I mean, it's kind of
2009. Yeah, we announced Last Guardian at E3.
It's such a defining game for PlayStation in so many ways, and I think it says a lot about your job, which is to make quite difficult decisions that are going to result in people being upset or angry or suspicious. You're going to have to answer the same question every year at E3. What's happening with The Last Guardian? Where's it going? Has it been cancelled? What was it like, overseeing that game, the game that you knew you had to get out somehow, but maybe weren't sure was ever actually going to happen?
I had almost forgotten the time that you reminded me that every year I go to the event and I get interviews. The journalists ask questions, so where's Last Guardian? What's going on in there? So I took over here in 2008. And so I was responsible for Eco project until, we moved that to PS2, and I left the team to the US. So it was Kobayashi-san, who was the producer of Everybody's Golf series, who succeeded the team and helped team to finish Eco and the Shadow of the Colossus on PS2. And the The Last Guardian was started under the same team on PS3. So when I became responsible for global development in 2008, the game was already in development for a couple of years. So I went back to Japan and started working closely with Japan studios. And at one time, we saw enough progress of Last Guardian on PS3, even though it has some technical issues, because what they are trying to do with the AI and animations for that dog bird, it's amazingly complex, and it was tasking the CPUs, even its supercomputers within PS3. So so team was struggling with frame rate issues, but it was making enough progress that we saw that yes, we can finish it in a couple of years, and we announced it. And after we did the announcement, the team just continued to struggle. The frame rate was like 10 frames or 15 frames, and it wasn't publishable. And so there are lots of work done on the technical side. I asked the Western teams to help, look at the code and do some porting. On PS3, there's such thing that if you break down the programs, small enough to run on that small, incredibly fast processor, your game runs faster. So all those efforts still couldn't get it done. So when Kobayashi-san moved on to do his own stuff, and I managed to get Alan Becker, who was the founding studio manager at Santa Monica Studio, to move to Japan to succeed, we made that decision to move it to PS4. And it was very hard, especially on the team side, because all of us knew how much that game was anticipated, especially for people. Some people told us they purchased PS3 to play that game, and we are so bummed that we are not able to deliver the game to them. But at least, I insisted that we should keep working on this and move it to PS4, even if it meant that the technical side had to be completely redone, because it's such a different architecture. And there are a lot of turnaround of people. Some people are disappointed, or just tired of working on the same project for longest time. But the core team stayed on. We rearranged the relationship with San and some of their members, so that they become a little bit more independent, but still have them 100% focused on the project. And we launched it in 2016. It was a really, really long journey, and it was very, very stressful. But what's great about people are we are good at forgetting things. I wasn't. I totally forgot all those years, and I'm happy that we were able to release it. And it's amazing, it's Ueda-san's style that the final game is very close to what he started. He always creates this vision video at the beginning of the project. It's same for Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, and Last Guardian created this vision piece to communicate what he wants to accomplish to the team members. And the Last Guardian, the final game, was improved in many ways because of the better tech available on PS4. But what he really wanted to accomplish with the title, the communication between the boy and the bird, and for the player to look at the bird and really get attached to how cute that animal is. I think the team accomplished all of that.
How many times did you think, let's just cancel it?
I heard a couple of times. I didn't say that. I heard, but I wasn't convinced. Because I thought it should be done, right? The game developers are really good at finding some shortcut, right? So I believe that, especially after we moved to PS4, this should be able to be done. But it was really hard for the team to finish. Especially the last few months was so difficult. Like fighting bugs and whatnot.
It speaks to this tension that exists in your job, though, doesn't it? Is that you have your responsibilities to PlayStation, the business, and to Sony, but you also have a duty to your teams as well, right? How do you walk that tightrope?
I tend to focus on what we are working on now, and I just realize, sometimes, this is what we've done. This is just my personal experience, that when I'm just doing things without thinking, if I'm doing things, is when I get the best result. So I usually don't try not to worry too much. Because things go wrong, right, all the time. But we'll find a way to manage to get things done. Not always, but
sure. And that's a very difficult thing to do when the games that are being made have got budgets running into the high tens of millions. I mean, everything's a big risk now, isn't it? There are no small bets anymore.
It's we used to talk about, wow, we are spending 50 million on one game during PS3 days, and now we are talking, well, we are spending more than 100 million on one game. It's very, very stressful. It takes much longer. We used to see teams making games every other year or so, just a generation ago. Now it's not uncommon to see, teams needing 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And it's amazing, sorry to say this, but after so many years in PS4 generation, we have teams who haven't published the first PS4 games as yet. But, we understand that, things take much longer, and the end result is amazing when you play games like God of War or Horizon or Uncharted 4. It's amazing games, and I don't know how these games are being made. It's so brilliant.
Job.
It's so brilliant. It's amazing. So, so I think world needs these games.
I mean, there seems to be this kind of, it's almost like a PlayStation style at the moment, that for much of last year, all of the headlines were saying that single-player games were dead and everything was moving to games as services and stuff. And yet, PlayStation first party is exactly opposite to that, right?
I wish we'd been more successful on the multiplayer side as well. That we get reminded, especially internally in the company, that hey, we're a studio when you make great online games or something. But they give us lots of credit for making those amazing single player games. Because making any type of game nowadays is so difficult, and it takes so much. So I think it's just natural for a team to look at themselves and what is it that they are most capable of, and what is it that they have the chance to create, push this art forward, instead of following what's successful in the market. Just follow their heart, and whatever that they are doing well, and they still have a lot of ideas to advance it, they should do it. And it just so happened that we are fortunate to have those teams who are able to push forward this type of games.
What kind of challenges are the teams as a group kind of facing kind of today? Because it's very late in a generation. Everything seems to be running ever so smoothly, but there's surely stuff going on behind the scenes we don't know about.
Because the game takes so long to make, it's less about hardware. It's more about creating this huge chunks of software program. So each team is on its own timeline, I think, and the changes based on the phase of the development. But the common theme could be to find and retain the most talented people. I think that's the key, right? That's the most important thing to make your team successful. So that's a constant challenge for all of our teams.
And what's the answer to it?
I think it's a culture they develop within each studio, and that's invaluable when you just cannot get bunch of talented people together and ask them to create something amazing, because it's hard, because it's hard that the team has to work well together. And when things go wrong, they have to be able to trust each other and find solutions to move forward. and it takes very strong culture within the studio. So we try to do as a management of group of studio is to try to help preserve individual studio culture, whatever it is.
We will not be talking about PlayStation 5 today, just in case anybody was expecting us to. But I do think everybody's looking at the future and the prospect of possibly some change on the horizon. What do you, when you look at games now, not just the PlayStation first party stuff, but games in general, what do you hope that they will get better at?
Yeah, so one thing that for the last few years, we are able to produce and please, many fans in the market, like remastering and remaking, classic, great games. Like we release games like Shadow of the Colossus or Ratchet and Clank. People love it, like Crash Bandicoot that I produced, during PS1 days. It was brilliantly remade last year, and I enjoyed playing the games again. And this year, Spyro of the Dragon looks amazing. And because I was a producer, I still remember every single placement of gems, and it was exactly the same. Watching the gameplay at E3, and that's all great. But that also tells, perhaps, how little the game itself has moved on, advanced. Classic games, simple games are still great. I understand, and the current games are much, much more complex, like AI and behaviors and animations. So definitely the games have made much progress on that. Like watching the Last of Us Part 2 gameplay video during E3, I was thinking, wow, there are lots of things just made for this trailer. And Naughty Dog guys, no, these are systems, AI driving these behaviors of AI characters. So that's what I like to see more. I really like to see the interactivity becomes more and more complex. Because we are getting older. Game developers are getting older. That's all great because people are complex, and we really love to interact with real people. That's how we all live. And if we can interact with all these amazing people who are characters within the game and constantly entertain by doing it, that's amazing. Amazing way to spend time. Yeah, so that's how I'm very interested in the advancement of AI, in the world, machine learnings and all those things. But the game has to be real time. So the game AI and those cloud-based AI, very different. But in the future, smart people will be able to find ways to make digital characters more human or more interesting, more complex, understand yourself, the players, and become able to infinitely entertain the players. And so that players maybe keep paying us. Yeah. Right.
So that's going to take 10 years and cost $150 million, right?
Well, we are always surprised. We always, the advancement of something, is almost feels accelerating now these days, tech-wise. I had the fortune to get deeply involved in this PSVR project, and I'm still a huge fan of what's happening in this use of VR tech by the developers, finding a way to make amazing experiences. And look back on 2 or 3 years when we are preparing for launch of these systems. I wasn't expecting so many, advancement of use of these tech. it's great. It's much faster, and also the investment made in this field, VR and AR. So many big companies are now involved. And oh, by the way, there's a talk by our London studios. Right after this, they are one of the pioneers of use of VR tech, to adapt to video games. And I hope many of you have a chance to take a look. So I'm a huge fan of VR projects, and I have very high hopes for the future. I always say that PSVR and Oculus and HTC, this generation is like, when we had PS1, right? And look at all these advancements for the last 20 years of the use of real-time 3D graphics for the games. Mm-hmm. And same kind of, advancement will continue to use these new tech, new medium for the next 20 years. So I cannot wait to see.
As you reflect on the 25 years that you've spent with PlayStation, what's been your proudest achievement?
Proudest?
Proudest achievement, yeah.
Yes, my role has been to kind of help really talented people to create amazing games. And if I am to pick just one, I was so happy and proud to see the very young team called That Game Company made, Journey for us, and like swept all the industry awards. And I am so proud to see. Yeah, because that game, Journey, was was defying all kind of genre. It's so new, but and it's very short game, like 3 hours you can play through. But you feel when you play through, you have deep emotional reactions, especially towards the end, to think about life and death and people close to you who might have passed away. I was thinking about my grandmother who passed away a few years before I was playing the game, and I almost cried. So I was so proud of what they have achieved with Journey, that I still put it as the #1 project I had the chance to work with.
I was going to then ask you what your greatest regret was, but that seems a bit mean now.
Well, yeah, people are great that we have, talent to forget things and just move on, and I'm very good at it.
Final question, sir. Who's going to win the World Cup?
England. I like to.
There's a door right there. Don't worry.
I like to see England play against Belgium again. Yeah, because Japan was beaten by Belgium, so was England. So I like to see them go up to the final and beat Belgium.
Wonderful.
They are great.
Shu, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks
Thanks everybody
you.
for coming.